A Fellow Traveller by Nathaniel Hawthorne. One day at noontide, when the sun had burst suddenly out of a cloud, and threatened to dissolve me, I looked round for shelter, whether of tavern, cottage, barn, or shady tree. The first which offered itself was a wood, not a forest, but a trim plantation of young oaks growing just thick enough to keep the mass of sunshine out, while they admitted a few straggling beams, and thus produced the most cheerful gloom imaginable. A brook so small and clear, and apparently so cool that I wanted to drink it up, ran under the road through a little arch of stone, without once meeting the sun in its passage from the shade on one side to the shade on the other. As there was a stepping place over the stone wall, and a path along the rivulet, I followed it, and discovered its source, a spring gushing out of an old beryl. In this pleasant spot, I saw a light pack suspended from the branch of a tree, a stick leaning against the trunk, and a person seated on the grassy verge of the spring with his back towards me. He was a slender figure, dressed in black broadcloth, which was none of the finest nor very fashionably cut. On hearing my footsteps, he started up rather nervously, and turning round showed the face of a young man about my own age with his finger in a volume which he had been reading. Till my intrusion, his book was evidently a pocket Bible, though I piqued myself at that period on my great penetration into people's characters and pursuits. I could not decide whether this young man in black were an unfledged divine from Andover, a college student, or preparing for college at some academy. In either case, I would quite as willingly have found a merrier companion, such for instance as the comedian with whom Gil Blas shared his dinner beside a fountain in Spain. After a nod which was duly returned, I made a goblet of oak leaves, filled and emptied it 2 or 3 times, and then remarked to hit the stranger's classical associations that this beautiful fountain ought to flow from an urn instead of an old beryl. He did not show that he understood the allusion, and replied very briefly with a shyness that was quite out of place between persons who met in such circumstances. Had he treated my next observation in the same way, we should have parted without another word. "It is very singular," said Itho. "Doubtless there are good reasons for it that nature should provide drink so abundantly, and lavish it everywhere by the roadside, but so seldom anything to eat. Why should not we find a loaf of bread on this tree, as well as a barrel of good liquor at the foot of it?" "There is a loaf of bread on the tree," replied the stranger, without even smiling at a coincidence which made me laugh. "I have something to eat in my bundle, and if you can make a dinner with me, you shall be welcome." "I accept your offer with pleasure," said Roman. "A pilgrim, such as I am, must not refuse a providential meal." The young man had risen to take his bundle from the branch of the tree, but now turned round and regarded me with great earnestness. Colouring deeply at the same time, however, he said nothing, and produced part of a loaf of bread and some cheese, the former being evidently home-baked, though some days out of the oven. The fare was good enough, with a real welcome such as his appeared to be. After spreading these articles on the stump of a tree, he proceeded to ask a blessing on our food, an unexpected ceremony, and quite an impressive one, at our woodland table, with the fountain gushing beside us, and the bright sky glimmering through the boughs. Nor did his brief petition affect me less because his embarrassment made his voice tremble at the end of the meal. He returned thanks with the same tremulous fervour. He felt a natural kindness for me after thus relieving my necessities, and showed it by becoming less reserved on my part. I professed never to have relished a dinner better, and in requital of the stranger's hospitality, solicited the pleasure of his company to supper. "Where at your home?" asked he. "Yes," said I, smiling. "Perhaps our roads are not the same," observed he. "Oh, I can take any road but one, and yet not miss my way," answered Roman. "This morning I breakfasted at home. I shall sup at home tonight. And a moment ago I dined at home. To be sure, there was a certain place which I called home, but I have resolved not to see it again till I have been quite round the globe, and enter the street on the east as I left it on the west. In the meantime, I have a home everywhere or nowhere, just as you please to take it." "Nowhere, then, for this transitory world is not our home," said the young man with solemnity. "We are all pilgrims and wanderers, but it is strange that we two should meet." I inquired the meaning of this remark, but could obtain no satisfactory reply. But we had eaten salt together, and it was right that we should form acquaintance after that ceremony, as the Arabs of the desert do, especially as he had learned something about myself, and the courtesy of the country entitled me to as much information in return. I asked whither he was travelling. "I do not know," said he, "but God knows." "That is strange," exclaimed I. "Not that God should know it, but that you should not. And how is your road to be pointed out?" "Perhaps by an inward conviction," he replied, looking sideways at me to discover whether I smiled. "Perhaps by an outward sign." Then believe me, said I, the outward sign is already granted you, and the inward conviction ought to follow. We are told of pious men in old times, who committed themselves to the care of Providence, and saw the manifestation of its will in the slightest circumstances, as in the shooting of a star, the flight of a bird, or the course taken by some brute animal, sometimes even a stupid ass, was their guide. May I not be as good a one? I do not know, said the pilgrim with perfect simplicity. We did, however, follow the same road, and were not overtaken, as I partly apprehended, by the keepers of any lunatic asylum, in pursuit of a stray patient. Perhaps the stranger felt as much doubt of my sanity as I did of his, though certainly with less justice, since I was fully aware of my own extravagances, while he acted as wildly, and deemed it heavenly wisdom. We were a singular couple, strikingly contrasted, yet curiously assimilated, each of us remarkable enough, by himself, and doubly so in the other's company. Without any formal compact, we kept together day after day, till our union appeared permanent. Even had I seen nothing to love and admire in him, I could never have thought of deserting one who needed me continually, for I never knew a person, not even a woman, so unfit to roam the world in solitude, as he was, painfully shy, so easily discouraged by slight obstacles, and so often depressed by a weight within himself. I was now far from my native place, but had not yet stepped before the public. A slight tremor seized me whenever I thought of relinquishing the immunities of a private character, and giving every man, and for money too, the right which no man yet possessed of treating me with open scorn. But about a week after contracting the above alliance, I made my bow to an audience of 9 persons, 7 of whom hissed me in a very disagreeable manner, and not without good cause. Indeed, the failure was so signal that it would have been mere swindling to retain the money which had been paid on my implied contract, to give its value of amusement. So I called in the doorkeeper, bade him refund the whole receipts, a mighty sum, and was gratified with a round of applause. By way of offset to the hisses, this event would have looked most horrible in anticipation, a thing to make a man shoot himself, or run amuck, or hide himself in caverns where he might not see his own burning blush. But the reality was not so very hard to bear. It is a fact that I was more deeply grieved by an almost parallel misfortune which happened to my companion on the same evening. In my own behalf I was angry and excited, not depressed. My blood ran quick, my spirits rose buoyantly, and I had never felt such a confidence of future success and determination to achieve it as at that trying moment. I resolved to persevere, if it were only to wring the reluctant praise from my enemies. Hitherto I had immensely underrated the difficulties of my idle trade. Now I recognized that it demanded nothing short of my whole powers, cultivated to the utmost, and exerted with the same prodigality as if I were speaking for a great party, or for the nation at large. On the floor of the capital no talent or attainment could come amiss. Everything indeed was requisite: wide observation, varied knowledge, deep thoughts, and sparkling one's pathos and levity, and a mixture of both, like sunshine in a raindrop, lofty imagination, veiling itself in the garb of common life, and the practiced art which alone could render these gifts, and more than these, available. Not that I ever hoped to be thus qualified, but my despair was no ignoble one, for knowing the impossibility of satisfying myself, even should the world be satisfied, I did my best to overcome it, investigated the causes of every defect, and strove with patient stubbornness to remove them in the next attempt. It is one of my few sources of pride that, ridiculous as the object was, I followed it up with the firmness and energy of a man. I manufactured a great variety of plots and skeletons of tales, and kept them ready for use, leaving the filling up to the inspiration of the moment, though I cannot remember ever to have told a tale which did not vary considerably from my preconceived idea, and acquire a novelty of aspect as often as I repeated it. Oddly enough, my success was generally in proportion to the difference between the conception and accomplishment. I provided 2 or more commencements and catastrophes to many of the tales, a happy expedient, suggested by the double sets of sleeves and trimmings which diversified the suits in Sir Piercy Shafton's wardrobe. But my best efforts had a unity, a wholeness, and a separate character that did not admit of this sort of mechanism.